Through it all, Mariama carried the legacy of her parents, her mother's grace and strength, her father's resilience and faith. She had the kind of beauty that caught your eye. Her skin shone like polished mahogany, and her smile, when she dared to show it, was as bright as the first light of dawn. But in her grandmother's household, beauty was a burden. Though she grew up without both parents, but their love lived on in her heart, guiding her through her darkest moments. One fateful morning, Mariama had found an old red dress tucked away in a forgotten corner of the house. It was faded and frayed but still beautiful to her young eyes. She washed it carefully and wore it, hoping to feel a semblance of joy. When her grandmother saw her, her face twisted in rage. "You think you're special," she spat, yanking Mariama by her arm. "You're nothing but a burden. That dress was your mother's, and you don't deserve to wear it." Her grandmother tore the dress from her, shredding it before Mariama's eyes. Then she locked Mariama in the small, dark storage shed behind the house. There, surrounded by the stench of mold and rotting wood, Mariama sat trembling. Hours passed, and hunger gnawed at her stomach, but no one came to let her out. The humiliation stung almost as much as the cold. Eventually she was let out. Another time, Mariama had been entrusted with carrying a small bowl of milk to a visiting elder. The bowl slipped from her trembling hands and shattered on the ground. Before she could even apologize, her grandmother struck her across the face. "You're cursed," her grandmother yelled. "Everything you touch turns to ruin." Mariama was forced to kneel on sharp pebbles in the courtyard as punishment, holding a large stone above her head until her arms shook and her knees bled. Most days, while the rest of the family slept on comfortable mats and under warm blankets, Mariama was given only a thin mat to sleep on the hard, cold floor. When the nights grew unbearably chilly, she tried to call into herself for warmth, but the hunger pangs kept her awake. She was always the last to eat, and by the time her turn came, there was little left. Mariam's grandmother, my aunt, was a cold woman. She never forgave Mariama for surviving when her own daughter did not. "She is the child of death," the grandmother would say when others weren't listening. Years passed, and nothing changed for Mariama. She grew taller and more beautiful, but the household grew harsher. Meanwhile, while Mariama was being maltreated by her grandmother in another village, Suleiman, on the other hand, gradually began to regain some stability. The physical labor was grueling, but it kept his mind occupied and allowed him to provide for Mariama's upkeep. He visited her as often as he could, bringing small gifts, a hand-carved toy, a colorful piece of cloth. But each visit was bittersweet. Mariama would cling to him when he arrived, her tiny arms wrapping around his neck, and cry when he left. "Baba, don't go," she would plead. Each time, it felt like his heart was being torn in two. What Suleiman didn't know was that while he struggled to rebuild his life, Mariama's grandmother and extended family were treating her with neglect and cruelty. They blamed her for Amina's death, though she was just a child. Suleiman sensed that something was wrong during his visits. Mariama's once bright eyes seemed dull, and she was quieter than before, but he dismissed his intuition, believing his in-laws would care for her as their own. Years passed, and Suleiman continued to rebuild his life. He started growing crops again, and his harvests were bountiful. Neighbors remarked on his resilience, admiring how he had managed to overcome such loss. Yet, his heart remained heavy with guilt and longing for the family he had lost. One day, a neighbor who had visited Mariama's village brought troubling news. "Suleiman," the woman said, "I've seen your daughter. She's thin, too thin. And the way they treat her, it's not right." Suleiman's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "They make her do all the chores, Suleiman. I've heard the grandmother calls her names, blames her for her mother's death. She eats last, after everyone else. It's not the life Amina would have wanted for her." The neighbor's words ignited a fire in Suleiman. he realized he had failed to protect the most precious part of Amina's legacy. Determined to make things right, he began planning to bring Mariama back to live with him. But before he could act, the royal messengers arrived in the village, setting in motion the events that would transform Mariama's life forever. One day during the dry season, when the air was so hot it seemed to burn your skin, Mariama was sent to fetch water from a stream nearly dried up. The walk was long and exhausting, but Mariama did as she was told. When she reached the stream, she bent down to fill her calabash. That's when she heard a voice. "Excuse me," the voice said. Mariama turned to see a young man standing nearby. His clothes were simple, but there was something about him, a quiet confidence, a kindness in his eyes. "May I have some water to drink?" he asked. Mariama hesitated. She had been warned not to speak to strangers, but this man didn't seem dangerous. She handed him the calabash. "Here," she said quietly. The man drank and smiled. "Thank you," he said. Then he asked, "Why are you here alone? Where is your family?" Mariama hesitated again. She didn't want to complain. But something about the man made her feel safe. Slowly, she told him about her life, about her grandmother, the uncles, the beatings, the chores. The man listened carefully, his expression growing serious. "You have endured much," he said. "But do not lose hope. Sometimes, help comes when you least expect it." Mariama didn't know it then, but the man was no ordinary traveler. He was Prince Jamal, the younger son of the king. He had been traveling the kingdom in disguise, seeking to understand the lives of his people. When he returned to the palace, Mariama's story stayed with him. He couldn't forget the girl with the kind heart and the strong spirit. He spoke to his parents, the king and queen, and they decided to act. A week later, royal messengers arrived at the village. The villagers gathered, curious and excited. The messengers announced that the prince had chosen a girl from their village to come to the palace and live under the queen's care. They described the girl, her name, her beauty, and the villagers realized they were talking about Mariama. Her grandmother tried to argue. "She is clumsy. She is cursed," she shouted. But the messengers ignored her. They found Mariama, packed her few belongings, and took her to the palace. At the palace, Mariama's life transformed. She was given clean clothes, plenty of food, and an education. The queen treated her like a daughter, teaching her manners, languages, and the ways of the court. Mariama blossomed into a confident and intelligent young woman. Prince Jamal visited her often, and their friendship grew into something deeper. In time, he asked her to marry him. Mariama, the girl who once ate scraps and fetched water in rags, became a princess. On her wedding day, Mariama returned to her village. She didn't come to gloat. She came to forgive. She built a well for the villagers, so no one would have to walk miles for water again. Her story became a legend in our village, a reminder that even in the darkest times, kindness and resilience can lead to light. And I, the quiet aunt who watched it all unfold, tell her story to anyone who will listen. Though Suleiman's story is one of grief and regret, it is also one of redemption. In the end, Mariama's strength and kindness, traits she inherited from both her parents, became a testament to the love and resilience that had shaped her, even in their absence.
Please do like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.